Welcome back, everybody. So today we finally get to put together a video I've been wanting to do for a long time, but that's basically on the HK USP chamber in 45. And the one thing we're going to look at today is this pistol a relic of the past? Is it a relic of the 1990s in the way people thought about firearms and firearm design back then? Or does it still have some validity today in today's market, in today's world, and the things that we look for out of our pistols today? So the HK USP came in 9, 40, and 45. One thing I want to talk about today to prove or disprove the relevancy of the HK USP chamber in 45 is the ballistics of the round itself. Here we have the Federal HST plus P in 230 grain. We have the Spear Gold Dot in 200 grain. And we have the Hornady Critical Duty in 220 grain. And these are probably the most common 45 ACP personal defense cartridges that you're going to find today on today's market. All these have been quite proven along the way, and I know they've been tested quite extensively on YouTube, but we're gonna take that a step further today and actually test how these cartridges perform through different mediums that you could potentially find yourself in, right? Along with that test, when we get to that point, we're going to be comparing that side by side to the 124 grain Critical Duty out of my Glock 45. So essentially we'll have a sort of a side-by-side comparison, an HK USP and chamber in 45 ACP and our Glock 45 chamber in 9x19 while we're checking these things out. For the first one here is just automotive sheet metal. I have a couple areas selected out that we're going to be comparing the 45 versus 9 going through just automotive sheet metal, and I think that would be a pretty good and relevant test to see will these things make it through and still do some damage on the other side, or maybe they might not expand at all. So the second thing I wanted to look at, and I know there's been a lot of tests along the way with cinder blocks, right? They're kind of fun to shoot, whatnot, but usually for the most case, the rounds make it through the front side, but of course they don't go through the back side. So what I did is I cut the back side off this, and we're just going to put a gel block behind here and see if there's anything left between the 9 and 45 after going through that, and we'll catch that in the gel block and just kind of see how things fare. It's basically a good test to see after going through a really tough barrier that's going to do a lot of damage to the bullet itself, is there anything left after that to do any kind of damage to it? All right, and so for our third test here, we have sheetrock on the backside particle board, kind of set up an example of going through plywood on back. What kind of performance loss do we take after going through these two types of barriers, and how do they perform in the gel block after that? So that's the next thing we're going to check out too. Right back at the table here, we are set up at 7 yards. I got the Garmin set up there to test some velocities. We're going to be checking the velocity, and we're going to be calculating the foot-pounds of energy coming out of the muzzle. And then we're going to be coming down here, checking the damage we do on the block and the ballistic gel test. We also have a camera set up over here for some close-up and slow-mo. I'd always like to catch that if we can, and we'll kind of see how things go. All right, so first up we have the Spear Gold Dot 200 grain plus P. We've got the Garmin set up here at 7 yards, and we'll see how it goes. So really good hit with the Spear Gold Dot. We got 1,073 feet per second coming out of the muzzle, and that's delivering 511.8 foot-pounds of energy. Not too bad. It's a really solid hit with that Spear Gold Dot 200 grain. So upon entering the block, it almost immediately started to expand, and the bulk of that really heavy damage goes into about 4 inches right here. We have a grand total of 12.5 inches of total penetration on that one. And there's that pill. Look at that really nice expansion that we've got going on there. Kind of the overall wound track coming in. Let me pull that out. We'll measure it and weigh it and see what we get there. Okay, so up next to the Federal HST 230 grain plus P. We'll load it up and see how that goes. Right next to it. That one came out there at 939 feet per second. And let me check the rest of the data there. That's 504 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. Okay, so right next to it, the one that's facing closest to the camera, is the Federal HST. And one thing I noticed that I probably should be doing is mounting that block to the table. It's actually pushing this block off the table. Potentially these rounds could go a little bit deeper if it wasn't moving, but I'll continue to do this how I've been doing, because that's, I didn't tape the first one down just to keep things fair, but it's something I should look at in the future. So let's take a look at our travel path one here. This one, the Federal HST went in just slightly deeper at 13 inches, another 1/4 inches deep. Here's a wound track on that Federal HST right here. This is the Spear Gold Dot. You can see it went a little bit further. This one's at 13. This is 12.5. Both of them expanded very well in the gel block. When it hits the gel block, it goes in about 4 inches on each of these and just does some really, really heavy damage initially. The wound track on the Federal HST might be a little bit heavier back here from what it kind of looks like, at least in the light there. There's the entrance, but awesome performance out of both of them for sure. All right, so last but not least, for this particular test, we have the Hornady Critical Duty 220 grain plus P at 7 yards. We've got our Garmin all set up, ready to go, and let's do it and see what we get. All right, I'm going to roll the block over here. So our Hornady Critical Duty gave us a little bit more penetration yet, sitting at 13.5 inches. So right here on this one, we have the Hornady Critical Duty. Here we have the Spear Gold Dot, and here we have the Federal HST. Okay, so right off to our far left here, this one right here, the entrance wound on the Hornady Critical Duty actually does look very similar to the other ones there. If I'm looking at it closely, the Critical Duty sort of ended its major damage that you typically see up front a little bit sooner than the other two. So the Critical Duty has a little bit harder lead in it, and they generally don't expand as far, but what they do is still give you some expansion, yet is able to penetrate through barriers, and we're going to take a look at that later on. But really good tests there. They all performed very well, honestly. But yeah, if you're looking kind of at this cross section from maybe right here down to here, you can see as the round slows down and that damage starts to dissipate, I would say the Hornady Critical Duty, and it makes sense because it's got that harder lead, it probably didn't expand as far, it would be the least amount of damage back in here. Next up, I would say the Spear Gold Dot back in this section, and then still carrying through the most amount of damage would be the Federal HST. We'll see if that kind of performance carries through barriers that we're going to be testing later, and we'll kind of see how it goes, and we'll go from there. Okay, and the Hornady Critical Duty had a muzzle velocity of 1038.3, and we're going to check real quick that muzzle energy just to put it down. So we've got that. Okay, 526 foot-pounds of energy. So all these kind of 45 ACP defensive loads tend to be running in that 500 to 530 foot-pounds of muzzle energy, and you can see in the gel block they do perform very similarly. Each of them have their own kind of unique characteristics. We have the Federal HST, and those things are known for really expanding a lot. I haven't measured those yet, but I'm sure those are going to be pretty big diameter. We notice that all three of these rounds expand right away. They dump that energy as soon as it hits the gel block. Granted, I'm not going through any other material right now, clothing and whatnot, but at least in this raw gel block test, that's kind of what we're seeing. The penetration on these seem to be similar. Of course, the Hornady Critical Duty did penetrate a little bit further, but we'll see if that stuff carries through with the barrier stuff, which we're going to actually do right now. Okay, so to kick things off and to make it fair, we're going to do 5 shots and get a velocity rating out of this. This is actually somewhat of a newer pistol to me. I just kind of finished it somewhat recently and haven't actually done any velocity testing out of it, especially with this Hornady Critical Duty. So we're going to do 5 shots. We're going to get our readings, our velocity readings, and our muzzle energy, and then we'll kick it off from there and actually do the test on the trunk of the car. Last shot, 1083.5, and we'll check our data here. All right, so the minimum was 1181, Average was 1,191. Max is 1207. And last but not least, our muzzle energy was 390.6 foot-pounds of energy. So not too bad. Next, we're going to be moving on to the ballistic test through the rear of the car. Okay, for this next test, we're going to be comparing the Hornady Critical Duty 124 grain plus P and 9 out of my Glock 45. And then continuing on the ballistic gel test out of the HK USP Hornady Critical Duty in 220 grain plus P. And for this initial test, so I've marked the car in an area that the metal is equally thick. And behind it, we have our original test block. We're going to do the initial test, 9 and 45, and then we're going to swap the blocks out because these things are getting pretty shot up, and we'll continue on with the test. Later on, we're going to pull these guys out and measure them for future ref, but you know, hopefully you get some good data with that. Okay, so first up, Glock 45. We got the suppressor length barrel, 124 grain plus P, and we'll shoot it, see how it goes. All right, so not too bad on that first test. We have a nice clean entrance hole right there, and I was back up on this part here, not over in any kind of door latches or anything like that. And here's our round here. We have a total travel of 14.5 inches into the block. And here's our entrance right here after ending the rear of the trunk. We traveled through here. We did decent amount of damage, you know, for having to go through that. So right at above 4.5 inches in, it started to shed a jacket. That'll show up obviously on our weight retention test on the scale, but we ended up back here. Of course, after going through the rear of the trunk and whatnot, we did lose some energy, and you know, we're not seeing as heavy devastation of expansion and tearing up of the material as you normally would with that, but not too bad. Now we'll move on to the HK USP. Okay, so next up we have the Hornady Critical Duty 220 grain plus P at 7 yards, and we'll see how we do. Should have been a good hit on that. All right, so we did have a successful hit right here with the 45 ACP. So here's your 9mm path right here, right? But really, here's the bulk of the damage before it shed its jacket. And the damage, that heavy wound track continues to travel through all the way out. It starts to taper off right about here. It came out the back of the block. So, you know, who knows where it is? Somewhere buried off in all these shells is my 45. The reason I wanted to keep that was because I wanted to see the amount of expansion that we got out of that. So a lot of times what happens is the round won't expand at all, or not nearly as much as you normally would see after going through something, because we've slowed the round down, right? And I guess right here you could say this is sort of the argument with the 45 ACP, right? You have a considerably more damage of the 45 continuing across the entire block. It must have expanded at least somewhat, because I do see some tearing and whatnot through there, but you know, who knows how much, and it did exit the block. So, however, we have other things to still go through, and maybe the 9 will outshine the 45 on our next test. Okay, what's up everybody? So we're moving on to our next test. So what we have here is a similar test as the previous one. We're still at 7 yards. I have an X marks the spot here. This is where we're gonna be shooting. And then I have my gel block on the back side. So the rounds are gonna have to travel through a piece of our Pro wood. It's 7/16 thick, and a piece of typical housing sheetrock, and then on through into our gel block. And I do have a fresh one there this time. It'll help maybe clear up some of that stuff. One thing I want to add too is, so the test I'm doing here is not really an end-all be-all and all the tests that there could be. This is just hopefully gives us a snapshot on what these pistols and what these rounds are capable of, because there's so many variables, right? On the car door, on the car trunk, for example, you could hit a latch, you could hit something else that's harder. Modern vehicles are made of different tensile strengths and different strength steels throughout the vehicle. Like your A-pillars, they're stronger, tougher metal than on the sides of the doors and whatnot. So there's a lot that goes involved in it. And just because we did well on one particular test here doesn't mean it's the end-all be-all, but hopefully it gives us an idea of what can happen. So without further ado, we're going to move on to our next test. Okay, so next up, 9x19, 124 grain through our plywood and our sheetrock. Okay, so really interesting test on this one. We actually did better than the car. So our entrance was right here. We traveled through. We have a decent little hole in the backside of here. So we got some tumbling and some decent damage here. And we ended up right here. I don't see really a lot of expansion there, but the bullet must have tumbled right about here. That's my guess. You know, you kind of see that a typical tumbling path where you get sort of an expansion in one area, then it kind of narrows back out. So it probably went through the wall, tumbled there. We ended up backwards right here. Interesting test though. So we went in a grand total of 18 3/4 inches in with the bullet tumbling around. And once again, to make it fair, I want to obviously measure that in the end and weigh it, but I do not see really any expansion at all. Up next is the HK USP. We have that in, that's a thumper, wow. We have this in 220 grain and plus P, and we're going to see how it goes. That one might have hit high. We'll see here. Okay, so next up here is the 45 ACP entrance. Lots of particles and whatnot in here. We exited the wall here, and then this top track here is from the 45 ACP. So the 9 ended up stopping at our 18 3/4. The 45 also stopped in at the 18 3/4 going through that. So as far as how far they're able to penetrate, it did about the same. As far as the wound track goes, I'm going to give it to the 45. It is more damage. The wound track looks a little more devastating as we continue on through the block before the bullet finally comes to rest. Once we get the final diameter of those, then you can actually kind of give this like a probability of how much damage it can potentially do. But yeah, not too bad on that particular test. We hopefully did learn something with this one here. Okay, so looking at this 2 previous tests so far, what have we learned? So given everything is generally pretty equal, you know, we have 2 pistols, they both have suppressor length barrels. So far, the 45 ACP has been more consistent and has done more damage as we've gone through these different tests. From the trunk of the car, going through plywood and stuff like that. And it's been a little bit more consistent to get through things and keep that damage going. There are definite advantages to 9mm, and you know, I'm going to kind of cover some of that stuff later in the video after we finish these tests. But the next test here is sort of somewhat a novelty, something I've just been kind of wanting to do, and you know, I think it just might be kind of interesting. So let me explain. So what we have here, you know, I've seen a million videos, like I was saying earlier at the start of the video. Everybody likes to shoot cinder blocks. It's fun to watch them blow up, things like that. But really, until you get to, you know, 7.62 by 51, the bullets usually stop on the inside of here. They don't make it past both. You need like a heavy round, a lot of power to get through both sides of these, because, you know, like I said, I cut that in half and keep going. So what I wanted to do here is test each of these rounds in a scenario where it's going to be hitting some kind of concrete, some kind of building materials that's not wood, you know, it's not sheetrock, it's not metal, but it's just some kind of material like this. And once we've gone through one layer, is there anything left after that to do any kind of damage to the block, right? So here's the carnage left over after that 9x19 hit. You know, it's kind of like I was saying before. They usually just blow up and then end up on the inside of here. If this were an entire block, there's really no entrance wound. These are from previous tests. Did not do any damage on the way through. The 45 might, it might not, and that's kind of what we usually typically see, right? You know, usually something like a hard cast or a ball round will get through and do a little bit more damage on the back side of that, and a lot of times they don't. But we'll try the 45 next and see how that goes. All right, so coming up on the 45 ACP carnage, we got blocks and crap everywhere. Once again, as we usually see, there's no damage. It did not penetrate the block at all. However, this time we did pick up a jacket and a few pieces of material from the bullet. There you go. Still cooking quite a bit. It got completely flattened out. And then here's the plug in the end. And then you have just a few random pieces of lead here and there, but looking directly on the block, right, there's nothing there. The bullets basically just disintegrate when they hit the block. So in conclusion, how did things go? So bullets do weird things when they hit different shapes and objects and hardnesses and whatnot. These three here are just from the raw gel block. You can see excellent expansion. Anytime a round hits something hard or something that, you know, could potentially damage the round, you can see definitely what happens to it. After all, we're just dealing with lead and copper, right? They can shatter and go into many different pieces. On this here, I guess my conclusion with this is when you have a situation where you have two rounds and these ones here went through the drywall and the particle board, you know, all you really have left is the diameter of the bullet and the mass and the weight of it continuing through. And because of that, the 45 just ended up carrying more damage through the block, even though neither of these expanded almost at all. If I take this away here, and we'll roll the block on its other side here, kind of take a look at it from a different angle. You can see the travel path of the 9mm. This is where it tumbled. And just at this point, I would imagine that the round just ran out of a lot of velocity. It probably spent most of it trying to basically tumble and continue on through the block here. And at this section and this point here, it's just basically a really thin travel path through there. The 45, it maintains that thickness and that same width going through the block like this, like you can see. Each of these rounds ended up at the same depth of the block on the other one, but it still was able to maintain a larger diameter wound path going through there. So one of the things I wanted to test out, and I thought that might be kind of interesting, is do we gain any kind of velocity by adding a suppressor to the HK USP? Here we got this Silence Co. Omega 45K, and we have just some cheap Freedom ammunition, ball ammo, 230 grain, really slow, nothing special about it. But what I want to do is I'm going to fire 5 rounds over the chrono, check the velocity, then throw the can on there, do another 5 rounds and see if we picked up any velocity. First round up. All right, we got the suppressor on, chrono's reset. We'll do another 5 here and see what we get. So on that last run there, we had a minimum of 869, an average of 900.6, and a max of 943, with a muzzle energy of 414 foot-pounds of energy. On our previous session without the suppressor, we had a min of 875, an average of 885, a max of 899, and a average foot-pounds of 400.5. So there's an ever so slight bump in velocity and energy. Not a ton, but hey, you know, at least we tested it out, now we know. All right, so in this next section, we're going to be testing for accuracy. So what's an offensive pistol that's not accurate, right? just like they were attempting to do with the Mark 23, we wanted combat level reliability, yet maintain extreme match grade accuracy. And that's what we're going to be starting off testing right now. So our initial test, I have a target down there at 25 yards. It's sort of a makeshift sled here. I'm going to be setting the pistol up here and firing our 220 grain Hornady Critical Duty. I switched from the ball ammo to the hollow points. They tend to be a little more consistent, more accurate. So we're going to use these, and yeah, we're going to see what we can group at 25 yards. From there, we're going to start walking it back. I'm going to leave the sled behind after 25 yards because that's sort of our test bed for our group size, and we're going to switch to more real world stuff, holding the pistol out and doing groups going, and then eventually we're going to end up at 200 yards and see what kind of hits we can make with that. So next up will be 5 shots with the Hornady. One thing I do notice a lot with a Canon, your red dot fills up with carbon and whatnot pretty quickly. A lot quicker than without a Canon there. So here we go. Actually, we're going to dim that down 1. Okay. Looking good there. Okay, for this next part, I'm just going to keep walking the pistol back further and further back until we get all the way at the end of the range here. Right now we're at 40 yards, and we're just going to be doing some offhand shooting and seeing how well we can make contact with the steel plate. And my lens is getting really dirty. There's a hit. Okay, next up is 66 yards.
So in this test here, we took the USP out to 200 yards on some steel, and I just kind of wanted to see what it could do. We tried both the cheap 230 grain ball, and we tried the Hornady Critical Duty out at this distance. The other thing I noticed too is, so I'm using the outer ring on the RMR HD, and at 200 yards at this distance, I'm at the very bottom of the outer ring. So, you know, we're kind of at the max distance of being able to actually aim at it and hit it. But we did get some good hits out there, 2 out of 5, and I was pretty pleased to see that.
So the development of the HK USP was actually kind of an interesting story. It actually starts back in 1986 when we had that shootout with the FBI and some pretty serious bank robbers. So during that shootout, they landed successful hits, but they still kept fighting, they still kept going. From 1986 to 1990, there was a really big push for the .40 Smith & Wesson. And that's what this pistol, the HK USP, was originally designed around. And that's one of the reasons why it handles the .45 ACP so well. They didn't just start from a 9mm pistol and try and cram a .40 or a .45 into it, but they built that from the ground up. There's kind of 3 main things that, the way I see it, that really put this pistol on the map. 3 main events. One was, yes, the development of the .40 Smith & Wesson, which was hotter than a 9mm. The second was the development of the pistol itself. HK has never done anything quite like this before, and this was their effort to break into the US market, potentially military and law enforcement contracts, and really bring something new to the table, something that's never really been done quite before. The third thing was the development of the Mark 23. So the Mark 23 has a lot of interesting history to it. In the late 80s, early 90s, USSOCOM was interested in developing a new pistol that was better than the 1911 that we had been using since basically World War I, World War II, and so on and so forth. Aside from that, they also wanted to try and make an offensive pistol, essentially a handgun that you're going to go out and fight with, either defend your position or go out and take a position with a pistol. You wouldn't have a subgun, you wouldn't have a rifle or a shorty, but you'd have a pistol. And the idea with this was very new, and it's never really been done before. So the Mark 23 in and of itself was a huge success as far as what it was capable of doing, and what they wanted it to do. It went above and beyond everyone's expectations. The problem with it was the size and how unwieldy it was to handle. It was just too big. And most people never really considered a pistol a main weapon, right? We always consider that if you go dry, we switch to our pistol because it's quicker, things like that. Or, you know, maybe your your rifle or whatever is down for some reason, a jam, we switch to that. It's a secondary weapon. Because of that, the Mark 23 saw, you know, some really limited use through the 90s and the early 2000s. From what I understand, what it ended up being used for is sniper teams that would, you know, you put your big long-range, heavy DMR rifle on your back, right? And you would use this thing to clear rooms with, essentially. It's shorter, it's more manageable, and as we saw earlier from our, you know, ballistics test, it is pretty hard. So in 1993, HK USP was released in 40 cal. Shortly after that, the 9mm, and then in 1995, the 45 was released. And sometime between 97 and 98, we ended up with this one here. This is the, as I mentioned earlier, this is the HK USP Tactical version. And they took some of the features that were on the Mark 23, like I had mentioned before, like the O-ring barrel. It has a match trigger in it with an over travel stop. All the full-size USPs have the recoil reduction mechanism, which is essentially two springs in one. The second spring soaks up that extra energy. And because of that, that's one of the things that made the USP so versatile. So this pistol, you could run the cheapest, lowest speed, lowest velocity, 230 grain ball ammo that you can find, all the way up to 45 Super. It is rated for plus P and plus P plus. And that's one of the things that make the USP so versatile, is the different kinds of ammunition you can run through this. These things are built like a tank, essentially, right? So in this next section, I want to talk about what I've done to this pistol to kind of update it and to bring it into basically 2025, right? So the first thing, obviously, that you're going to notice is we have the slide build for an RMR. Right now I'm running the RMR HD. I've also run the RCR on here and the original RMR Gen 2, essentially. All of them work great. Obviously, this one here is kind of my favorite because of the window size. One of the things that come up if you're mounting an RMR HD on something is the hangover, right? The hangover. But essentially, how far the RMR window hangs over into your port. So here I have no issues with shells or anything like that are ejecting, hitting the face of it or whatnot. The main problem or the main issue that comes up, and I think that would be with anything, is when you're running the can, the extra blowback coming back does end up dumping onto the window there a little bit more than what you normally see on, you know, if you're just shooting unsuppressed. So the second thing I was going to talk about is essentially mag extensions, kind of bringing this into the into 2025, so to speak, with higher capacity magazines. Mag extensions have become really popular in everything. I know this is no exception for sure. So one of my favorites here is this guy. It's a +2. The reason I like it is it's so low profile still that, you know, you really don't notice it. You know, if you wanted to basically carry that, but you didn't really want to break that factory silhouette or that factory shape down here, this really doesn't stick out that much further than the factory does, yet it still holds another 2 rounds, and so you end up with 14. So if you want to really bring things up, we also have this one here. This is a +5, so you'd be running 17 in the mag, and one in the chamber is 18 rounds. 18 rounds of 45 ACP. That's pretty hardcore. That's going to be a lot of firepower. It still carries well. It's obviously longer, but it's not so long that it's unwieldy. And you know, H&K basically, let me see if I get those in the camera. They kind of added like some serrations on there. You know, it works really well. They grab on, it's easy to grab onto, and I do like what they've done here. The actual magazine housing is still the original HK USP magazines, so they're not doing any kind of trick weird stuff where they cheap out on one and, you know, do something really nice on the new kind of upgraded part, but it's still the original all steel USP mags. These are a little bit spendy, so this is like about 50 bucks if you want to attach it to your existing, or if you want to buy a whole new mag and it comes with the spring and everything, they're around $100, but they last a long time. And you know, who doesn't want 18 rounds of 45 ACP on tap? That's for sure. The second thing that we're going to talk about too, and this is kind of been talked about quite a bit before, but essentially the original rail down here is proprietary HK. But the problem with that is you cannot mount modern day flashlights, lasers, whatnot on there. So this is by GG&G. It's a decent setup. It works okay, I would say, for flashlights. It does have an ever so slight amount of bend to it. Doesn't wiggle, doesn't vibrate, just, you know, it flexes because it's aluminum. So it works well for flashlights. It's been working for me well for a long time. I have no problems or issues with it, but that's one thing that you might want to look at. So the other thing too is HK had come out with another one recently. I forgot to bring that with me on the filming today. But the problem with that one is it sits a little bit lower. It's got 2 clamping points, which is nice to see. I think with that, you would probably be able to run a laser on it because it's so much more stable. However, with it sitting lower, all the holsters and whatnot that people have made throughout the years, like the custom holsters, it's all for this setup here. It's either going to be the Surefire fill in the blank with this or whichever light you want to use. So you might have a hard time finding a holster for it that you know, that works with that other mounting system. Next up, we'll talk about holsters a little bit. If you want to get a holster for your HK USP, you can definitely do so and get one pretty much just off the shelf, right? If you do want to go with the RMR and the light and all that kind of stuff, those are going to be a lot harder to find, and you're going to have to go to a custom holster manufacturer for that one. You know, it's about the same price typically that you're going to find on another higher end like Safariland or whatnot, but that is kind of something to be aware of. There had been early Safariland holsters that was for the HK USP and did have a light, but those I have one, and they're you know, on the inside they basically put like some kind of leather, and it's almost like sticky, or it is now that it's much older. So I recommend, you know, avoiding the classic stuff altogether and just get something kind of modern made from a custom holster manufacturer. And then you have your Safariland QLS hookup on the back for your belt. It just hooks in right there, and you should be good to go. So finding holsters, you know, in 2025, not a big problem, and it clears that RMR just fine, and that's what you end up with there. Okay, so next thing I want to talk about coming up next would be suppressors. So one of the cool things about the HK USP is they were originally designed, you know, with the Mark 23 in mind. All the testing and stuff they went through back in the day on the USP as well, where these pistols are just as reliable suppressed as they are unsuppressed. I know pistol suppressors are sort of a niche area, right? Not everyone's interested in them, but if you are, the 45 ACP is a great pistol round to suppress. For one, and kind of the main reasons is, you know, unless you go up to 45 Super, you're going to be running subsonic, right? So ideally, like with some of the ammo we tested today, we're in that, you know, 1050 range or whatever, just under that supersonic range. So this one's the silent, like I had mentioned earlier, this one's the Silencer Co. Omega 45K. It's really lightweight, one piece. It's been a great suppressor for this so far. And the HK USP I will put out there is probably one of the best polymer frame 45 ACP suppressor hosts you can find. Just set it up exactly the way I have here. So these are the original, basically it's a target sight, the original sights that come with HK USP Tactical. If you look closely, you notice I have milled or machined, I've ground that down and shortened it up just enough where I can get my RMR on there. And then on the top, that what used to be the spring to adjust your elevation, right? That's basically now completely tightened down, red Loctite in a thin machine quality washer that holds that whole thing in place, right? So it's almost one piece It actually is one piece now, except for my windage, or I can still make adjustments on that. And that way I was able to run my original sights with the original suppressor height sights, by the way, with an RMR. If you don't want to go that route, you just want to throw an RMR on there. They do make basically a pedestal, a dovetailed type pedestal that fits in the back there. That is an option. If you don't want to run and go these kind of sights and go through all the trouble of setting that up, you can get aftermarket sights, but they might not be suppressor height. The suppressor height sights that I have run across online have been phased out. I would imagine they probably didn't sell too many of those along the way, because the original HK USP sights are so good, there's really not a reason to replace them. They're all steel, they're extremely well made. You know, and back in the day when these things were really, you know, really out there and out and about being used by a lot of different people, I can't imagine there's too many people sitting there going, yeah, these things need new sights, right? I mean, they're pretty solid. Like I'm really happy with them. And like I say, they just clear the suppressor too. So in conclusion today, taking a look at the USP 45 Tactical, or the USP in general, chambered in 45. One of the benefits of this large frame pistol is the fact that, like I had mentioned earlier, handles 45 ACP so well. And as I had kind of demonstrated today between the trunk, the gypsum board, or the sheetrock, and the cinder block, well, both of those failed that test, but the 45 ACP outperformed the 9 either by a little bit or a lot, depending on what it was. And that would be one reason to consider carrying a 45 over a 9mm. I understand the difference in recoil. Some people might not like the recoil of the 45 or the frame itself. That's really been the crux of the whole problem, is fitting the 45 ACP in a frame that you can send out to the masses with. You know, I have a little bit larger hands. That's great, it works well for me. What about someone that has smaller hands? Now, it seems a little bit too big, right? And therein lies, I think, the ultimate problem with this whole 45 ACP versus 9 versus 40, and what that really comes down to, right? So the HK USP is an absolute workhorse of a pistol. If you're looking for something for bear defense, right, cougar, you're out in the mountains and you want to run some 45 Super in there, something that can really penetrate deep into heavy muscle and fat tissue, you know, you can run the HK USP to, you know, do that. And like I was saying before, it's able to run that plus P plus and super level ammunition. If you're looking for something just plink and have fun with, you can just get a box of cheap low velocity 45, 230 grain and shoot some bottles or shoot some steel and have fun, right? If you want a bedside gun and you want to step it up and run some plus P hollow points, we definitely can do that. And if you want to upgrade your HK USP, you absolutely, as you can see here today, do that as well. With everything that we pretty much want to see, you know, high capacity magazines, we got 18 rounds here if we needed, the RMR, the light, and really it comes down to your personal preference. I really highly recommend, if you were thinking of getting a USP, get one, you know, especially if you're a big fan of the 45. And, but anyways, I really hope you enjoyed this video. I love making it. I know it took a long time to finally get out here and get to this point, but there's more to come. We have a lot more coming down the road with other things, and then this is just something I wanted to do. But anyways, stay safe and have a good one.